Oh, hi! Sorry, I was just brushing my teeth and getting ready for the day. And, believe it or not, I am making history. Did you know you made history today? You got up, got dressed, went through your morning routine, and set off for the day. Nothing unusual about that. Did you realize, though, that with every act, you were creating history? You were creating the history of your culture, locally, nationally, and of all people on Earth. Take brushing your teeth. In the future, perhaps right under where your house is now standing, a future archaeologist will discover your toothbrush. From that toothbrush, the scientists can deduct several things about your life and the history of the culture you lived in. Was dental health important to us? How did our dental care affect our dietary habits? Was it important that our teeth have a good appearance to others? Was the color, texture, and design of the teeth cleaning instrument important to us? How was it manufactured? When we look at past human culture, technology, and behavior, we try and discern how cultures changed and were sustained over time by looking at the traces left behind. This is known as the science of archaeology. So join me today. I'm going to check out some history at an archaeological field school not too far away from where I live, here in Indiana. Well, here I am, standing on top of history. In fact, history is all around me. The history of a people who lived long ago. Behind me are archaeologists from a field school run by Indiana University's Glenn Black Laboratory. They are gathering information to learn more about the history of this site, Angel Mounds, in southern Indiana. Located near the city of Evansville, this site was home to hundreds of people around 1100 AD. They lived in this area of rich, fertile soil along the Ohio River. They planted maize and made use of the birds, fish, land animals, and plants found in the river and marshes. They built mounds to elevate certain structures, palisade walls, and they built houses, pits, and other structures. It's at a field school excavation, like Angel Mounds, where you can see archaeology in action. For most people, though, interaction with archaeology consists of a visit to a museum observing artifacts in static collections. But archaeology is much more.
Well, I think archaeology affords an educational opportunity to teach about diversity and other very important anthropological topics. So I think that what happened in the past is very interesting, and I think that, for the most part, history only happens once, so it's important that we understand what happened in the past so we're not doomed to repeat, their failures or so that we can repeat their successes. I think people all over the world, and especially here in America, we have a connection to history and to heritage, and that we like to respect what's happened in the past, and archaeology is a wonderful way of doing that because it's getting out these stories that haven't been told, and it's providing that opportunity and preserving those sites for the future.
Popular culture would lead us to believe that archaeology is about treasure hunters searching for famous artifacts like the biblical Ark of the Covenant or an ancient Egyptian king's tomb, that it will lead to glory, fame, and riches. While the history of archaeology has had its share of treasure hunters, looters, and collecting for collecting's sake, today things are much different.
Well, the way archaeology is conducted today is far more scientific than in the past. A lot of what people see in movies and maybe the popular media is the adventurer, the Indiana Jones, who has some idea of a treasure out there that they're going to go hunt, but they don't really have a research design. They certainly don't have a well-formulated question in mind. It's more of a treasure hunt. We don't do that. What we're interested in, what distinguishes us from looters or grave robbers, that kind of thing, or Indiana Jones, if you will, is that we have specific questions in mind about how people lived in the past. And so we have to approach what we do in the field with a scientific method, if you will, which will help us go about answering those questions. We may come up with a theory about how a particular group of people produce their food. Were they farming or were they hunting and gathering? And what kinds of things might we expect to find in the field that would be evidence to support or not support one of those theories? So it's really important. We want to plan as much as we can ahead of time before we go out into the field. Having said that, once we go out into the field, you don't know what's underground. You don't know what you're eventually going to find. So there's a lot of thinking on your feet and being realistic with what you find in the field, and that's been my experience.
So, the study of archaeology is about more than museum collections, and it's certainly not about treasure hunting. How does one define archaeology then? Archaeology is about gathering information to answer questions about the history of a specific culture, or past human activities in general. It's also about finding ways to derive that information. Archaeology can answer questions that are purely for academic study. It can also be used to help the public interpret history and cultural heritage. Sites like Angel Mounds and Spring Mill State Park in Indiana are tourist destinations as well as academic research locations. At places like these, the public can gain a perspective on their lives today by looking at the past. Archaeological study also becomes a factor when an area of land undergoes development. Governments may make laws that mandate an archaeological assessment before any work can begin. All this type of archaeology is called cultural resource management. It makes up most of the archaeology done in the United States.
I've called this project at Spring Mill a cultural heritage project, and as I work with those terms, I wonder sometimes what I think I mean by that. But in essence, I think cultural heritage is a sort of it's history and it's identity, and it's about feelings that people have about places and times and events. On the archaeology weekend, we found on the surface a porcelain doll head. And that porcelain doll head was a direct link to some child who had that doll in maybe 1860 in that village. Who that girl was, if it was a girl, we don't know exactly, but it was found outside of a house that was lived in by a family headed by Thomas Hamer, who was one of the brothers who was a miller. And one of the owners for a time of the mill that was there. That kind of connection is much more special. It's intimate. It's in a way kind of friendly when we find her doll head. And I still remember when I was working in the unit with the limestone blocks, and I heard this young boy yell, "This is a spectacular discovery!" And he'd picked up that doll head. Right there, I knew that the people who were making those collections, the public, the visitors, the park visitors who'd signed up for our archaeology project, had connected with some person, an individual person from the past when they found that doll.
One of the students at the Big Horn Canyon Field School, Patrick Hill, a Native American of the Crow Nation, had an even closer connection to the site than the visitors to Spring Mill.
My perspective, I think, is more in a direct line because these are my people that camped here. Not that long ago in so much as time. My people were on horseback in buckskin a little over 160 years ago. So it's only 3 generations ago that these areas were used by the Crow. My feelings about being here personally, and then realizing that I have a direct connection with this site in so much as it being predominantly or more than likely that of a Crow site, and having had relatives who camped here, who who live and existed here. It's very I would say emotional. It's difficult to interpret, in so much it's difficult for, I think, anyone to describe that of their heart. But I think in asking and then hopefully having the involvement of those of the Indian here, it greatly enhances and it greatly benefits all involved in the short, long, and middle terms. We all benefit from it.
Going into the field and excavating designated sites is at the heart of archaeological work. Generally, excavations are started to gather research data. An excavation can also have a field school incorporated into it. Students have hands-on participation to learn the archaeological methods they will need to use in their careers. Sometimes, field schools can also include the public and give first-hand experience in what archaeology is all about. The work at Angel Mounds is done in conjunction with a field school and had members of the public visit the work going on. We'll look at work carried out by Indiana University at 3 field schools and a new cultural heritage project. Prehistory research fellow Staffan Peterson is one of the directors of the field school at Angel Mounds.
Our plan was to excavate a prehistoric structure, and we had located this structure via a remote sensing survey, and we laid in our excavation unit and realized very quickly that there was something unusual about this structure. We found a lot of burned soil, a lot of charcoal, charred wood, charred cane, and it became apparent as the weeks went on that this structure had been burned in a very hot fire, perhaps suddenly burned. And this is a really great thing to find because it offers the potential of a snapshot in time, the way that house existed at the time it burned down. So we are looking for possessions that were suddenly left behind, for example. And this is not a common thing to come across in archaeology. So we excavated for 5 weeks there, and we're not able to finish it. We're going to go back again in the summer and try to get the rest of this house out.
The Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area that straddles northern Wyoming and southern Montana is the place where IU professor Laura Scheiber has co-directed a field school. Research done here is on teepee rings left by Native Americans who migrated through the region.
Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area was established in 1966 when the government put in the Yellowtail Dam, which is just north of our study area. It consists of a very large canyon, not so different from the Grand Canyon, although slightly smaller, that has a Bighorn River running through the middle of it. On either side, there's fairly rugged terrain, and this was one of the few areas that people in the past were able to naturally traverse. There's sort of a corridor between areas along the edge of this canyon. And the area that we were studying was not too terribly large this last year. It was probably less than a quarter mile across or something like that. But this is part of a larger project in which we're interested in where people were camping all along this trail, and we've looked at several segments of this trail so far. Teepee rings have been of interest to archaeologists for a very long time. Unfortunately, there aren't always a lot of artifacts that are found within the teepee rings themselves, in part because people don't necessarily leave sharp objects, the remains of making stone tools, things like that, right in the middle of the houses. And for people who are fairly mobile, they don't tend to leave a whole lot behind. Part of the research that we're doing is trying to look more specifically at the organization of space, of how people are placing the rocks, how close to one another their houses are. And in fact, there's only something like 1% of all the sites, for instance, in the state of Wyoming, in which we have a confirmed date for these sites. Archaeologists like to put things in what we call temporal boxes. They like to know how old something is. And to look at something and not know how old it is, it's very hard for us to know which box to slot it into. So part of our project is to target particular areas where we might find buried hearths, where we might be able to retrieve charcoal that will allow us to get radiocarbon dating. So in the last several years, we've probably increased the state database by quite significantly by being able to do the radiocarbon dates of these charcoal in the middle of these hearths.
The Central American country of Belize is the place where IU anthropology professor Ann Pyburn is studying the remains of 3 ancient Mayan cities. This is at the Chowheash Field School. One of Dr. Pyburn's graduate assistants is Alicia Ebbett.
The project is a little bit different from some of your more traditional archaeology field schools in that Dr. Pyburn didn't decide that she wanted to go and work at the Chowheash site. Instead, the Chowheash, or the Crooked Tree community next to the Chowheash site actually came to her and invited her to come and work at the site. The community said, well, are you interested in doing archaeological research here? And the head of the council chairman, had been doing research on archaeology sites in Belize before this, and so he already had an idea of the kinds of questions that they might be able to answer there. And then he made arrangements with Dr. Pyburn that all of the workers, all of the labor at the site would come from the community and go through either the council or through the council chairman himself, and that's continued since the inception, which was about 20 years ago that this project started happening. And then Dr. Pyburn has generally been taking a field school down there every other year, and usually a group of Indiana University undergraduates. And this year we actually had a quite large project of about 20 students and then about 10 staff, so we had a very full camp this year.
Back in Indiana, IU professor April Sievert is one of the directors of a new cultural heritage project at Spring Mill State Park.
I'm currently working on a project in the initial phases of a project at Spring Mill State Park in Lawrence County in Indiana. It's the site of an early 19th century settlement which existed throughout the 19th century. They made ground corn, they made whiskey, they ran hogs up and down a little creek bed, they had a sawmill, there were woolen mills and other things. It was kind of a rural industrial kind of complex. And I'm working there for a number of reasons. One is that I'm interested in the reasons why people came and populated southern Indiana in the kind of what's known as the pioneer period, kind of around the time of statehood, which was in 1816. We've designed the project. I'm working with a colleague at the University of Iowa. We've designed the project to involve the public because it's a public property. It's a state park. It has many, many visitors. Areas of the original village have been restored and reconstructed. It's a complex site. It's really interesting, and people are excited about it because it's sort of right in their own backyard.
When archaeologists study the traces left behind by cultures, it makes up what is called the archaeological record. This consists of the surviving physical remains of sites, their artifacts, ecofacts, and other cultural sources such as inscriptions, writings, paintings, or other documents and records. A simple definition of a site is a place where people lived and left things behind. At a site, You may find artifacts, which are materials that have been made or modified by people. You may also find ecofacts, which are environmental indicators. They are things that people left, but that they didn't make or consciously modify. Garbage is an example. Believe it or not, what gets thrown out can tell you a lot about how people lived their lives. Chicken bones, for example, pollen from a bouquet, or a grave offering of nutshells. And don't forget our toothbrush. When it gets thrown out, it becomes garbage also. Like all scientists, archaeologists have a specific method by which they approach their work. They develop a question or questions to be answered. They also determine ways to answer them. This is the beginning of research design. Research design is a crucial element of an archaeologist's work.
From the very beginning, when students take archaeology classes, we tell them that having a research question or having a research design is absolutely critical to doing archaeology and to having a specific successful project. And without a research question, we don't really know what kinds of data to collect and how to collect it. So having research design before we go into field is absolutely critical, which means that we often spend months and months of work preparing for the time that we spend in the field. Research design always has to be flexible enough to be able to change once you're in the field, because you never know what the conditions are going to be like. You never know what either the weather conditions will be like. You don't know if your equipment's going to work. You don't know if what you think you're going to find is actually what you find. You don't know if you have the right number of people, the right kinds of materials once you get there. So being able to be flexible is very much part of designing a field project.
Again, a good research design begins with developing the question or questions to be answered. That is, choose your topic and decide where you want to go with it. Sometimes, the questions archaeologists explore are broad. One example would be, why did people start farming? Some might be more specific. What subsistence issues did the Mississippian culture at Angel Mounds have? Second, you gather as much information as possible already known about your topic area. You can do this by conducting a literature review. This may include books as well as different forms of media. You can also try communicating with those who have done research similar to yours. After you have developed your research design, you can collect data. Collecting data in archaeology often begins with a survey. An archaeological survey is simply looking at a geographic area or a site with the goal of finding out what is there and understanding it spatially. The simplest way to do this is walk over the area, as visitor participants did during archaeology days at Spring Mill. Another way to do this is to create a surface map by using a total station. A total station is a traditional optical surveying instrument that combines a transit, which measures vertical and horizontal angles with an electronic distance measuring device, or EDM. This information can be used to create topographic maps. Dr. Laura Scheiber's field school in Montana used this instrument in surveying their site.
Learning how to use the traditional tools of archaeology, which includes plane tables, alidades, and transits, are still something that I think are very key tools for all archaeologists to know how to use. A more recent introduction to archaeological field methods has been the use of the total station, and that's also very important for students to know how to use. More recently, we've gone into the more digitally savvy GPS equipment, which we can then tie into our information systems. But all of these, I think, must work together, especially because archaeologists never know what equipment they're going to have available to them, and they don't ever need batteries in order to use a transit and map a site and know the spatial coordinates of what they're finding. Maybe not in real time, in real space, but they'll be able to do a very accurate map with that. So we start with that, but then we also use a GPS unit, a very specific one that allows us to get sub-centimeter accuracy that we shoot in every single rock of every single feature, and we record where all of that comes from. We also record individual information about each rock and each feature in terms of, for instance, maximum length or maximum orientation, rock type or tool type. So the way that we record our GPS data is we have one GPS that's set up as a base station, and then we have either one or two receivers that we use as rovers. And the rover data is collected on every single individual point that we are collecting data for. So it's either a rock or an artifact or some other thing that we think is interesting. And our base data takes static data throughout the day. Then after we're done for the day, we go back to our ranch where we do have electricity in this case, and we bring the rover data and the base data together in order to give us this sub-centimeter accuracy, which here is averaging about 6 millimeters in vertical and horizontal space, of which we're able to plot everything that we found. That complete data set then needs to be joined to our attribute data that we take with our handheld computers based on the key log number.
These methods of surveying can help you learn about surface features. But what about looking below the surface without digging? Using technology to look below the surface without digging is known as remote sensing. At the Angel Mound site in southern Indiana, Stefan Peterson conducted a survey using remote sensing equipment to create a magnetic map of the area.
Well, part of my research for my dissertation involves doing a remote sensing survey of the Angel site. Originally, I was going to do a small part of it, but it became apparent rather quickly that we were getting great results using this technique called magnetometry. So I decided to expand the survey to cover the entire site. To date, I've done about 80 acres. I have about 10 or 15 acres left to do. The results of this survey technique have been spectacular. We have something like a floor plan of the entire site now, or nearly the entire site. And we are able to see very clearly where the houses are, where the palisades are, where open areas such as plazas are, and the relationship of all these features together. And it's a very powerful set of data which helps us understand the way this town was laid out and perhaps how it changed over time as well. The advantage of having the magnetic map of the site is tremendous. This magnetic map allows us to see where things are prior to excavation. It also gives us the ability to understand without doing any excavation at all. And this saves a lot of time and resources, and it's very conservative of the site. Archaeological resources are non-renewable, and Angel is a protected site, so we want to do as little damage as possible. Excavation is destructive testing, and we would prefer to do as little as possible. There really is no other way to get this kind of information without destroying the site. As a result of my magnetic surveys, we have a really good understanding of the types and distribution of features on the site. And this simply wouldn't be, this kind of information simply wouldn't be available otherwise.
So, are you ready to get to the down and dirty of archaeology? Excavation is, well, getting down on the ground, getting dirty, and having fun. Going to a field school and working with a team of fellow history detectives is a great way to broaden your horizons. At a field school, you not only learn what life was like in the past, you also develop skills to help you become both a scientist and a historian. So what's life like in the field on a dig?
Well, the journey out to the Crooked Tree, or out to the Crooked Tree community and the Chowheesh archaeological site changes based on the weather, basically. So depending on what time of year you go there, you're going to have a different experience. But generally, the students will fly out of Indiana University or Indianapolis, and then they'll fly into Belize City. And then usually a school bus from the Crooked Tree community will pick them up and pick up all of their gear. And then they drive the highway, the Northern Highway, to the site. And from there, you take a dirt road into the community. And then depending on whether or not the lagoon that surrounds the site is up, that determines whether you're taking a truck or a boat or a truck and then walking through some mud to access the site. And a year ago, the road into the village was covered with water. And so they actually had people taking boats into the village itself, because the village is basically an island surrounded by a lagoon, but there is a dirt causeway that's been built into the village. So before that, all villagers, when the lagoon was up, they would take boats into the village. When the lagoon is up all the way, that's the only way to access the site. This year, we took them out by truck to a little river that was forming in the lagoon, and then they crossed over the river on some cardboard and then hiked the rest of the way into the site. The students sleep in cabins, and they sleep in hammocks strung up in the cabins. The bathroom facilities are above-ground pit toilets. That is actually a much better system than what they used to have, which I never had to experience. We have solar showers. We construct small little rooms for the showers, little stalls, and students put out solar showers in the sun, fill up a bag of water, and that's how they shower. All of the food that's cooked there is brought from outside, and we have a stove in the kitchen, and we do have a generator that we run the computers off of and other pieces of lab equipment, electronic equipment, and then at night, when it's dark in the kitchen, we'll run lights in the kitchen so that students can eat dinner by light. And so that's the roughing part of it, but it's also really exciting to be in the middle of the jungle because we are not leaving as large of an imprint on the jungle as we could have. The camp is definitely permanent or semi-permanent. Because we have that experience, we are able to attract some monkeys and coatimundi and other pieces of wildlife in the middle of the night and even sometimes during the day. And we see them, we hear them, sometimes we smell them. And that's really a lot of fun and very exciting. And that's a big component of the field school too, is that local flora and fauna experience.
Well, we would get to the site around 8, and we usually had jobs. Like, some people would be on the water screens and some people would excavating. And we did 1 meter by 1 meter units, and everyone basically traded. Like, you would work on a unit, your own unit. Basically, you dig a 1 meter by 10 centimeter unit. And once you were done with that, you would take all the records, you would do all the work for it, take all your measurements and everything, and then all that dirt would go into a bucket, and then you would follow that to the water screen, and then you'd trade off with somebody else who was at the water screen. They'd come over the units and dig for a while. And that way everyone got the total experience, everyone got to dig and do water screening, and the site itself, the weather was humid and hot, and we were digging a lot, and it was just constant, just chunking out dirt and throwing it into buckets, and then so it was a lot of work. And but all the students on my field school were really great. Everyone got along really well. It was fun. We had a good time.
Yes, they seem to have summed up life in the field school very well. Now, let's check out the excavation process. Excavation is the only way to build a well-rounded picture of a site. It's the next step in the data gathering process. It's the most labor-intensive and destructive way of gathering information, but the most vital. Collecting archaeological artifacts and ecofacts is the only way to be able to assess food use, daily activities, social relations, and ceremonial activity. It is also the only way to accurately date a site. Excavation may first require an archaeologist to work with governments in order to obtain the necessary permits. You may also have to work with indigenous groups who claim political, cultural, or religious sovereignty in an area of a site. Archaeologists use their site survey information to make grids over the space where data is being collected. A site grid is a set of regularly spaced intersecting lines, usually marked by stakes, that provide the basic reference system for recording provenance of an archaeological find in a site. Dividing a site into grids allows for measurements and locations to be easily recorded. These areas are what make up an excavation unit. The size of excavation units depends on the overall research design. At Spring Mill, Dr. April Sievert set out a test excavation unit.
When we start to do an excavation, the excavation itself is something that has to be part of the research design. So we would put down an excavation unit, a test unit perhaps, and at Spring Mill we did just test units because we didn't really know what we would find under the surface. So a test unit would be something that you would place in a particular area in which you're interested in finding out what the stratigraphy in that area would look like. What we would do is pick a spot, sometimes in reference to a particular other structure or feature that is present on the site, or datum reference point or something of that nature. We selected to do a 1 meter by 2 meter square or rectangular unit. And we put it in an area where we had tested with a soil probe and found that we met a great deal of resistance when we put the soil probe in. It wouldn't go very deep. So we wondered what that meant and what that meant for what was underneath there. We laid out the unit by putting in a pin in one corner, and then we triangulated it out using the Pythagorean theorem, 1 meter on one side, 2 meters on another side. You figure out the hypotenuse, and you can lay out a nice rectangular unit that way. In the future, then, we'll be able to map that in with a whole map of the site. That test unit will allow us to be able to think a little bit differently about that particular area of the site, and we can use that information also when we compare with other areas of the site.
Strategies for recovering data depend on the research questions asked. Excavation can be primarily vertical. This reveals the history of sediment deposits and the stratigraphy or layering of the site. Horizontal layout of the site, the positioning of structures, and other features is best recovered through horizontal excavation. This might reveal, for instance, a buried, wide area inside a structure that was the floor of a living area. Another way to use remote sensing to examine what is under the ground in 3 dimensions is to conduct a resistivity survey. A resistivity survey measures the electrical resistance of the ground for the location of buried features and structures. It is similar to ground-penetrating radar in its use. However, instead of a mobile device, as is commonly used in ground-penetrating radar, a resistivity survey uses an array of probes set out over the area of interest.
The probe, the 72 probes are spaced 1 meter apart, and then you, most simply, you fire a pin and you read the amount of electricity and the amount of current that goes in various pins. The farther apart those pins are, the deeper the penetration. So by firing various combinations and reading various combinations of pins, eventually you collect a profile of what the electrical properties of the subsurface was. And you use those electrical properties to interpret what the stratigraphy is. Then we move it again and we get another one. So eventually we've got all of these slices going various ways into the mound, and then we'll put them together to form this 3-dimensional picture.
So now we know that when archaeologists dig, they are particularly concerned with the exact location of materials they find in 3 dimensions. That is, horizontally, vertically, and in time. All level measurements of the site are taken from a common point, which is known as the datum point. All these factors make up an artifact or feature's archaeological provenience. Archaeologists will sample the sediment or matrix in which the materials lie. They also take note of what other materials are in association or buried near them. When we combine the information collected about the provenience, matrix, and association, we have basis for what is called archaeological context. Without context, artifacts are just objects with no relation to their cultural origin. The context is what imbues artifacts with meaning. This is one of the ideas that separates real archaeology from pseudoscience or treasure hunting. This scene is probably what most people think of when they think about the science of archaeology, holding a large soil sifting screen and looking for artifacts. During the excavation process, sediment from a level is screened by putting matrix and its artifacts into a mesh and letting the matrix fall through it. It can also be screened by running water over the matrix to reveal artifacts. Another form of screening, back in the lab, is called floating, where materials like plant remains float to the surface in water. Dry screening material, in the lab, may also occur to reveal other artifacts. Once this has been finished, specimens collected are labeled and bagged. Collecting the specimens is at the heart of what's going on at an excavation.
Hey, can I borrow that?
Sure, but I'll need it right back. Like I was saying, collecting the specimens is at the heart of what's going on at an excavation. Any excavation is only as good as the records that have been kept. Done at the site, a field lab, or another lab, record keeping in the field primarily consists of forms that are filled out with standardized information. They record everything from the presence of rodent burrows to soil color. It is another crucial step in the data collection process and will help in data analysis. Learning to record soil color and interpret it using a Munsell color chart is one of the record-keeping skills needed in archaeology.
The Munsell color chart just simply shows, it's a physical description, it's a objective description of the colors that are in the soil. We can use those colors then as to compare one profile to the next profile. We not only need to know what is there, but we need to know what could be there too, so that when we start interpreting this, we don't make assumptions about our profile and assumptions about our distribution of artifacts or distribution of bone or distribution of charcoal that aren't really cultural. They really have to do with post-depositional, with site taphonomy.
Recording data at the Bighorn Canyon Field School also involved more than pencil and paper.
Well, we're using a GIS-based information system in order to overlay our GPS coordinates onto. We chose to use orthophoto quads, or basically satellite images, in order to show us pretty much what a photographic from space image would look like of the area that we're working. We then overlay the GPS coordinates that are real-time coordinates in UTMs that will go exactly where, we could plot exactly where those come from. So then that will show us in more detail the spatial organization, people's organization of space in the past, how close these rings are together, to what extent sometimes the rocks might have been disturbed since they were left, and what the concentration of artifacts are, how close those artifacts are to the rings, how that might inform us about domestic activities and activity areas, whether they occurred in one house or another, outside the house or inside the house. Maybe even some spaces were gender-specific, women's space, men's space, and so we can begin to determine some of those different kinds of spatial relationships.
Eventually, the dig will end and the field school will begin to conclude. But that does not mean all the work is done. Restoring a site to as natural a look and use as possible is important. After this, the students will leave having learned vital skills for a career in archaeology. For some field school students, they learned about more than archaeology.
Patience, I think. I think the most important thing I've ever learned in field school is patience, because everyone has their own way of working, and everyone has their own speeds, and you have to not everyone picks things up at the same time, or not everyone's able to do as intense work as maybe you can handle. And so just being patient with those other people, because you have to work with them. You're in a hole with somebody for like 8 weeks. You have to be patient with them. You have to learn how to work with them. So yeah.
There you go. Thanks. Once the field work is done, there's still a lot more work left to do back at the lab. Let's take a look. By the time an archaeologist has returned from fieldwork, it may have been a fairly long process since initially coming up with the idea of what to study. However, the most lengthy part of the work is just beginning: data analysis.
Oh, the data analysis part again, like the research design, is integral to the archaeological research project, because that's where you find out how the object was made, or how it might have been used, or even, if you're lucky, how old it was, or about how old it was. And that's where you start to answer your research questions and hopefully find evidence to support your hypothesis or refute your hypothesis about what was going on at the site. And they say that for every 1 day of archaeological fieldwork and excavation, you should expect to spend about a week of analysis in the lab. And so theoretically, you should be spending more time in the lab and doing data analysis than you should doing the archaeology excavation.
Home for Indiana University Field School students and faculty is the Glenn Black Laboratory on the Bloomington campus. Here, researchers conduct data analysis with artifacts, bones, plant remains, and soil samples. Being able to analyze soil samples from the Angel Mound site is crucial to the work being done there. One important fact that can be determined about a sample is its age. Ed Herman participated in the Bighorn Field School, but is also helping with the data analysis from Angel Mounds. He is analyzing soil core samples and helping to accurately date them using the carbon-14 method.
Things such as artifacts which were taken from the field are cataloged, and they are documented in a number of different ways on the site before they're taken back to the laboratory. Then they're brought back to the laboratory, often washed and again sorted. They may be sorted in relationship to size. They may be sorted in relationship to the actual type of tool, or what they're made of, or the type of lithic material. And these will be looked at later on as certain specialists begin to analyze very specific components. For instance, we have done what we call coring, where we take samples of the earth down to certain depths. We have approximately a 1-inch tube. This tube is filled with earth that gives us a feel. For instance, at the various mounds that are located in Angel Mounds, we've just started looking at cores from Mound A. And what we see within these cores is that different types of soil were used to layer additional height onto each of the various mounds. The other thing that we can understand through taking core samples is the approximate time that the entire mound was built, or at least the different layers when they were added to the mound. We do this by looking at things such as charcoal or organic matter that remain, and we do carbon-14 testing, and that can give us approximate timing for when different portions of the mound were built.
Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope made in the atmosphere that all living things acquire until they die. Carbon-14 decays over time, changing into the more stable form of nitrogen-14. This measurement of the rate of decay is called the half-life. Carbon, or any organic material between around 200 and 70,000 years old, can be dated. This technique has led to some new findings at Angel Mounds.
We've already gotten some very good results. Have an excellent radiocarbon date from the base of Mound A. Found, for example, that at the base of Mound A, the beginning of the mound started by stacking turf blocks. So the turf blocks were cut from the soil, and they're about 10 or 15 centimeters thick. They were cut, lifted, transported, and then put upside down as stacks, kind of like a sod house. So that was the core of the mound, and we took a piece of the grass that was preserved in this turf block from the base, and then 2 meters up took another piece of grass, and we dated those. The lower one came back 900 BP. The upper one came back 890 years before present. So, they're suggesting first that that's pretty early in the Angel sequence. That's about AD 1100 or so, and most of the radiocarbon for the Angel sequence is AD 1200 to 1400. So it's suggesting that the mound was was constructed very early in the sequence. And it also starts telling us now something about how this mound was put together, not just when, but how. It started with these turf blocks, and then there was B horizon stacked on top of it. So already we've learned quite a bit about this mound, and hopefully we'll be able to put it together in some larger framework.
While artifact dating is one element, overall, the way analysis is approached depends on the researcher's expertise and whether the research design was qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative analysis will produce results expressed as words, pictures, or objects. Quantitative analysis will produce results expressed as numbers. Dr. Scheiber's approach was quantitative.
Archaeological projects amass an amazing amount of data. We will often come back from the field with tens of thousands of lines of data that go back to particular artifacts or rocks or features. And each one of those lines may contain anywhere from 4 to 12 properties associated with them or more. And so it's critical first to look at all the data, to be very sure that it was recorded in a manner that is going to be useful. And what I mean particularly in terms of transcription errors, human error. So one of the things that before we can even start doing data analysis, or maybe the initial stage of data analysis, is more data cleanup. And that needs to happen while you're still in the field or very quickly after you leave the field, or you won't remember what particular errors, they won't make as much sense to you. They won't have as much meaning to you. So starting that data analysis directly while either in the field or after leaving the field is very important. And then moving from that to actually being able to start constructing different patterns, looking at, again, the spatial organization, where you find artifacts, what kinds of artifacts, where they came from, and what people might have been doing in order to create a better knowledge of what people were doing in the past is something that is part of a multiple step sort of process.
Coming to conclusions and the dissemination of an archaeologist's work is the last step in the research process. Sometimes your conclusions from a field excavation might be final, or you might find something new that will lead to further investigation.
In the summer of 2007, in a structure we excavated, we found a very unusual fired earth artifact. Our current understanding is that this was manufactured in place. It could be a kiln. That would be very unusual to find. In fact, it would be unique. We believe that the Mississippians fired their pots in an open fire and not in kilns, unlike many other cultures, even in the U.S. This particular structure could be a kiln. We're going to go back in 2008 and excavate the rest of the structure to see if we can get a little more evidence on just the nature of this construction.
Reporting your findings verbally, visually, and with the written word is vital to your work. It's how others will learn from what you have accomplished. It is also important to be able to communicate effectively to diverse audiences.
Well, like any academic endeavor, you have to communicate. If you don't, your work is irrelevant. So it's crucial that you are a good writer, that you present your work in an interesting and compelling way, that you are speak well at conferences in order for your peers to understand what you're doing and appreciate your work, and to be a kind of representative of the discipline for the public at large. A lot of archaeological research is pretty dry. A lot of the technical stuff simply isn't of interest to many people outside your own circle. So you have to constantly find ways to make the broader importance of your work known. And by showing how excited you are about your work and communicating that is crucial.
So now we know the methods by which archaeologists conduct their work. Archaeology is a profession that follows scientific methods and attention to detail in conducting research. We've also learned that fieldwork and participating in the down and dirty of excavation is at the heart of archaeological research. And while it can be very labor-intensive for field school students, it can also be very rewarding and fun.
Probably my favorite thing about doing field work is just seeing the pieces of the puzzle come together. So when you begin and you're up on the top levels, you're really not sure what you're going to find. We have these great pieces of equipment now, these geophysical pieces like magnetometers or ground penetrating radar or electrical resistivity meters, but they can't really tell you what you're going to find. So when you actually start the process of excavation, there's that moment of discovery, and then you get the wheels turning, and it's not just this mindless labor. And I really enjoy the talking with all of my other crew members. Okay, this is what I think. What do you think? Let's brainstorm. What are the many possible interpretations we could come up with, and what's the best one? So I think I like the community aspects and the interpretation at the trial's edge and that discovery.
Being in the field is just fun. I mean, being in the field is when we actually have a chance to manipulate the earth, to locate various artifacts that can help us obtain more information and a better understanding. That's a big draw in archaeology.
Perhaps you like manipulating the earth, but you also have an interest in what elements make up the earth. Having some knowledge of sciences allied to archaeology, like geology, can make you a more rounded scientist.
Well, allied sciences in general are very important in archaeology, and archaeology is a very interdisciplinary sort of project. Geology is very important, geography is very important, biology is very important, even chemistry is important in order to do sort of both the data collection and the analysis that we commonly do in the field today.
Are you ready for a career in archaeology? What inspires someone to be an archaeologist?
When I was a kid, I was rambunctious, and my mother would say, "You're making me crazy, go outside and dig a hole." So very often that's what I did. And in the hole, there would sometimes be stuff. Usually just rocks, boring things like that. But I didn't think they were boring because I collected them. I collected everything that I dug up in the holes in the yard, brought them in the house, filled the basement, created my own museum out of basically nothing. It was fun. So after that, I just liked it. The idea of being able to find something in the earth that was a remnant of something that was present long ago. One time we found a spindle whorl, and that meant that there was somebody there once spinning yarn, and that was just so cool.
For me, it's very personal because I come from a country where there's a lot of cultural heritage, but it's not very well described, and it's kind of segregated because of colonization and all those sorts of stuff. So for me, it's more of a personal goal to restore that, to tell people how important it is. I mean, these are your roots, this is who you are, and to show that these people were connected with other people. They knew their surroundings, they knew, basically their whole continent. I mean, I think we underestimate these people a lot, and I think archaeology does that. It tells you how advanced people were in other aspects of life, even more so than we are now.
If you know that digging in the dirt and learning about how humans have shaped their world is your thing, getting into a field school will be a great start.
It was pretty much the most fun I've ever had with a summer of my life. I went, and it was hard. It was a change from the regular pace. There was no electricity. There was no running water. We had to take care of ourselves out in the wilderness, but it was really fun. It helped me figure out a little bit more of who I was as a person. It definitely made you go, oh, the power's out. Oh, well. It made you help realize that we have it pretty well up here and that you can just take the problems as they come and work with them. It also was a great way to make friends. I have friends that I will probably keep in contact with for at least the rest of my school career, if not the rest of my life from this. Also, I was able to make lots of contacts in the anthropology department. I know at least 3 graduate students by name, and I was able to talk with people, some of the best people in the field, like face to face, just sit down and chat with them, like Dr. Ann Pyburn in archaeology, people in bioanthropology that were at the top of their field, ceramic specialists, lithic specialists. It was just great.
When we look at past cultures and try to understand who they were, we look at the traces they left behind. Archaeologists put these traces together.
I'm after the connection between people from the past, and more than anything, I like to find things that give me a sense of sort of a direct connection. Sometimes that's as simple as being able to pick up a particular tool, look at it under the microscope, figure out what it was used for, and know that at some point in the past there was a human hand holding that tool and maybe scraping a hide with it. Those traces, they're hard to get at sometimes, but when you connect with that one person or one particular episode or an activity, you know, you really feel like you've just transcended all those years in between, and you kind of know that person a little bit better.
My toothbrush is really dirty from being used at the excavation. I wonder, what do you think it'll look like in 100 or 1,000 years from now? Will a future archaeologist figure out that this was used to clean my teeth and other things as well? Certainly, I won't be putting it in my mouth again. I hope you have enjoyed this introduction to archaeology. Perhaps you have been inspired to check out a field school. Maybe you will even become an archaeologist yourself. Being here at the Angel Mound School and watching the scientists excavate a site has made me think. I have been witnessing the opening of a time capsule to humanity's past. Perhaps one day you too will look into the time capsule. You will be working at an excavation that will unlock a mystery in the history of a people who lived far away or nearby, finding them in the traces left behind.